Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we can begin. I'm just waiting for those to come in from the... Thank you. I'm Tom Axworthy. I am Public Policy Chair here at Massey College, and delighted with our partner, FLOW, the Forum for the Leadership on Water in Canada, who has been working on these issues for many long years, as well as Massey College, to welcome you here today on a very, very exciting day. I want to begin with the land acknowledgement that Massey College is built on the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. And like them, we hope we can be stewards of this land for many long years to come. So water, its domestic impact, its bilateral impact, and its global impact is our theme here today. We have a very exciting keynote speaker, 3 panels, and I want to start us to get right in it. But before we start, I'd like to give a special shout out to our American friend, the Consul General, Baxter Hunt, who is here with us and will be on the second panel. So thank you for coming. And Minister MacDonald from the Northwest Territories. So, as well as mere academics like myself, it's nice to have decision makers here in the room. So I want to introduce the moderator of our first panel, Emily Hines, who's the Executive Director of FLOW. She has done an amazing job, and more than any other person is responsible for the organization of this conference. I'm the pretty face. She's the one who's done all the work. Emily Hines.
Hi, everyone. So I just want to say for today, my goal for this conference is to be really conversational. I want this to be a time where we ask questions, ask hard questions, have discussions and debate. So I want everyone in this room to feel comfortable to ask those. And I really encourage you to lean into the tough questions that we might not know the answers to. So with that, I'm going to invite our first panel up onto the stage. So we have the Honorable Jay MacDonald, who is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change for the Northwest Territories, who is the Polis Project on Ecological Governance co-director from University of Victoria and also my boss. And we have Dr. Saeed Mohammed Afiq Moen, who, again, thank you, has come in last minute, and I really appreciate it. He's an expert in flooding and resilience. I'm really looking forward to having him today. And finally, we have Charmaline Mendes-Millard, who's the Director of Partners for Action. So again, Charmaline came in last minute. I really appreciate everyone being here, and let's start this conversation. Thank you. So for this panel, what we want to talk about is that we are in the age of extremes. Canada has seen extremes from drought, wildfire, and flooding. And how do we build resilience from a policy perspective, a community perspective, and a science perspective? So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and give a bit of an introduction on what they're working on and the challenges they're facing. Then I'll ask everyone a question, and then we'll go straight to Q&A from open dialogue. So, Mr. MacDonald, I'll pass it to you first. Give your 5 minutes and just tell us what you're up to.
Sure. Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today in such a room of esteemed water supporters and experts. So it's truly my pleasure to be here. And good morning to everyone. As Minister of Environment and Climate Change for the Government of the Northwest Territories, we see our drastically changing climate as something that affects every person in the Northwest Territories. And we're experiencing particularly rapid warming and effects of climate change, with some areas warming at approximately 4 times the global average, so which has really provided tremendous impact to us in many, many areas. I thought it might be helpful to try and understand the northern context. Our small population is spread across a vast territory. Sorry, my apologies. Most communities are small and remote, and so I'll just provide a little bit of context for those that may not be familiar with the NWT and sort of our geography. So we have 10 communities that rely on seasonal winter ice roads that are built directly on frozen ground, lakes, or rivers. 19 of our communities have all-season road access, with most of those communities relying on a single road, making them vulnerable to wildfire along the highway, and the supply chain is very vulnerable to disruptions. 4 communities have no type of road access at any time, and 3 coastal communities are on Great Slave Lake. For some fly-in and winter road communities, critical resupply of food, fuel, and other essential goods depends on seasonal marine transportation, primarily barging on the Decho or Mackenzie River. We've seen extreme water fluctuations in the last number of years. So within the last 5 years and a bit, we've had record highs and record lows. So it really shows the impact that climate change is having on our territory at a scale that we have really never seen before. As a lifelong northerner and an Indigenous Métis raised on the banks of the Slave, I see firsthand how water shapes our lives, our culture, and our identity, and how it impacts our future. The river has been more than just a source of life. It's been a teacher, a source of food, a reminder of the responsibility to care for the land and the water that sustain us. Further north, the loss of multi-year sea ice and rising wave action on the Beaufort Sea at the ocean is increasing the rate of land erosion on our coastal communities, and this is really impacting. Our communities are shrinking because of the changing climate. We have infrastructure that's becoming more and more susceptible to that. Permafrost, degradation is another area that's certainly impacting our, in many cases, very aged infrastructure that has been around, for 50, 60, 70 years, and certainly not designed back in the day to address the climate pressures and the changes that we're facing in today's world. The rapid warming has been occurring in NWT since the 70s and is already having a significant impact on health and safety of our residents through extreme fluctuations in water and levels and quantity, increased risk of wildfires, permafrost thaw, coastal erosion, and the impacts of wildfire certainly have been prevalent in two of the last 3 years, with 2023 being the worst wildfire season in history and 2025 being the second worst wildfire in Canadian history. So certainly a large impact on us as a territory. Our 2024 Forest Health Report also shows that increased drought stress is impacting the health of our forests and has really added to the challenges that we face as a territory when it comes to dealing with wildfire. In a lot of the areas that in the past we've relied on natural barriers, fires that are 10 or 12 or 15 years old that used to be a natural barrier. As we're experiencing severe drought over a number of years, those are no longer barriers. The wildfires roll through them like they're not there. So these are some of the challenges that have certainly, been apparent to us recently. So a little bit on what we're doing now. So NWT residents are a resilient group. Part of the resilience is rooted in our Indigenous knowledge and residents' long-standing connection to the land. So we're very engaged with our Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations across the NWT. And a major step taken by the GNWT in the last 5 years has been to specifically consider climate change impacts in governmental decision-making. Climate change considerations are now specifically included in formal decision-making instruments of Cabinet and the Financial Management Board. We're expanding our wildland fire fighting efforts. We've got a flood mapping project on the go that's a critical piece of the work that GNWT is doing and undertaking to improve available knowledge and prepare for potential flooding events. In partnership with Indigenous governments, we've established 2 new Indigenous and territorial protected areas since 2019. With the active stewardship of Indigenous guardians, these areas serve as a climate refuge and for wildlife and vegetation. Our Healthy Land, Healthy People plan will see us implement and strengthen protected areas and conservation areas across the territory. This plan aligns with the NWT, Our Land for the Future initiative, previously known as Project Finance for Permanence, which is designed to provide long-term sustainable funding and support with Indigenous-led conservation efforts across the territory. As the ultimate downstream jurisdiction of the Mackenzie Basin, the GNWT works with its provincial and territorial neighbors through transboundary water agreements to ensure that the ecological integrity and of the aquatic ecosystem in NWT is maintained. And this is a key commitment of our settled land and self-government agreements across the Northwest Territories. And what are we doing next? The GNWT is shifting toward a single integrated climate change and energy strategy due to be released in the spring of 2026. A dynamic approach to longer wildfire seasons and drought have to inform the work that we are doing. The shift aims to address public feedback, calling on cleaner, more coordinated government actions on climate-related issues. And, this is work that's really done collaboratively with the Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations across the NWT. And I think that's, one message I really want to bring today is that we have a very unique co-governance approach in the Northwest Territories that, has really shown a lot of positive, benefits at the end of the day. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Minister. Now I'm going to hop over to Oliver to talk about what he's doing at Polis and the wildfire project.
How about now? Okay. So, hello, friends, old and many new. It's a pleasure to join today. I want to shout out to Tom and Emily, who've brought us all together here. And I'm just going to start a bit provocatively here by saying, listen, water is going to define the next century. I think most of us know that. But when I say that, I mean water and how we manage it and how we govern it. It will decide whether we are a wealthy and prosperous country or whether we slump into some kind of mediocrity. So, Emily's already indicated I'm Oliver Brandis. I'm at the University of Victoria, and my focus, like almost everybody here, we talk about water, we deal with water. But I focus on watershed security, where I kind of blend the policy, governance, law, and ecological restoration, the interaction of all these elements all together in one context. I'm looking for those system-level solutions, and for my brief remarks, I'm going to just kind of hit some of the high notes of what we need to be thinking about when we talk about organizing ourselves for success. And that means thinking about water not just as a sanitized, single-issue kind of problem, but thinking about watersheds. So I'm very purposeful when I talk about watershed security. I think water security is a great starting point, but water exists in a context, in a living context. And that living context, that's where we live, the people, but the critters, and our economies, and the whole works. And so we need to be thinking about watersheds and how they interact, and we have to think about those ecological functions. And that's where the connection of some of what I do at Polis, which is dealing with some of the issues. So we could, of course, talk about source protection or environmental flows, or talk about how we might better manage the dam or the reservoir, but we also need to think about the health and function of the watershed. So that's where things like wildfire come in, and things like land use, and how we think about the whole system and how it interacts. And, you know, we'll learn lots more about wildfire this afternoon, but I just want to kind of give a little teaser from where we sit. And that's the shift that I saw 25 years ago around water, where we began to understand that water is part of the natural system as it flows through all our institutions, all our landscapes, all our lives. And so we suddenly started talking about environmental flows, and this idea that a flow, what I call a life pulse of a river, matters. So it's not just that we all have the same amount of water every day, but the stream sometimes bulges, sometimes there's floods, and that's natural. Too big, too little is what we're suffering. Wildfire is the same. There's a healthy natural constraint. We want some fire on our landscapes. That's what keeps it natural. But not too much. Catastrophic fire, the famous saying, right? We don't want all our smoke in August. We want it spread out. So that's part of it. So you can see that if we start thinking about our watersheds as living systems, we can start thinking about watershed security in a much more serious way. And there's a couple components to that. And we're living in a time where we don't have the luxury anymore of thinking about these issues, these ecological processes, as just going to take care of themselves. I have many friends that work, for example, in the salmon field. And not long ago, they used to say, just leave the salmon alone, they'll take care of themselves. No longer the case. The systems have become so shifted that we have a role to play, and that's where governance, law, policy come in. And we can talk about all levels and all of these issues, watersheds, water, wildfire. There's not one single jurisdiction. In fact, it's going to take a whole of society approach, and it's going to take multiple pieces, and we have to reorganize ourselves. So it's going to be some programs, yes, but more importantly, how are we going to make these decisions, and at what scale? And so we spend a lot of our time thinking about decision-making at that watershed scale, and we think about the complementing policies, laws, rules. You know, rules matter, and so consequences matter, because that's what changes our behavior. And so we need to be thinking about these integrated systems with players at all levels doing their parts. So for today, we'll probably focus a little more on the federal level when we think about national. But of course, we know in all these issues, every scale of government, including Indigenous governments as legitimate authority holders, are going to have a critical role to play. And so at Polis, we often think about these issues in the context of what I'd call a nested governance system, where the players are working towards a common cause, but using very different tools, very different kinds of interventions, policy, prescriptions, planning initiatives. The whole pieces work together like in a puzzle. And a critical way to think about this interaction is thinking, when we think about water, certainly we think often about provincial jurisdiction. They're one of the primary players when we talk about water and sustainable water use. And it's very important to recognize, and I'll use the example because I'm living it in British Columbia, where we have many of the right words. We have a watershed security strategy underway. We have a watershed security fund that helps fund this kind of work. But again, it's often piecemeal. So we have plenty of tools in the toolbox. But what's missing? It's the carpenters, the groupings that can use the tools to change the behavior, change the landscape, reintroduce the ecological function, give us the resilience to respond. Those carpenters, we often think about decision networks or decision clusters. I often will talk just in simple terms, a water board. A water board can operate on different scales, but that's where you bring together multiple perspectives, multiple values, and you start making some of those critical decisions. Because remember, we are no longer in the luxury of just being able to sit back, leave it alone, and it'll take care of itself. That won't happen. So we have to be thinking about all these pieces. So this is some of what I'd call the polis work that we do on ecological governance. Very important, different than government. Government has a critical role to play, but governance is about the broader mix of decision-making from professional associations, community groups, multiple governments working together, including Indigenous, which means multiple worldviews, multiple ways of building resilience. And I think a very simple way to think about some of the priorities that we can probably dig into a little deeper this afternoon is when we think about the sort of newly minted Canada Water Agency with a promise of a national policy or the work around that is we don't do these things in separate abstract steps. We don't sit over on the left hand and do the work of policy while we don't do the actions. We actually have to engage. So we have to be doing both things. We have to be bringing funds. We have to be deploying the regulations and the tools to ensure minimum flows remain in streams, that land is managed in a way that ensures that the hydrology stays intact, that the salmon habitat plays a role. And we have to just think about this security thread that runs all the way through. And I'm going to shamelessly steal some of Tom's recent words in a newspaper article where he emphasized that, listen, the word security or the concepts around security have changed over time. Cyber, pandemics. Well, it's time to think about national security in terms of water. It has tendrils that can touch on all aspects of the kind of work we're doing. And that isn't just at the border. And we have many friends here from the IJC. The border waters are unbelievably important in this complex world, but just as critical is us taking care of our own backyards, our own watersheds. And again, that's where all the players come in, and maybe I'll give the final point of emphasis. Governments can't make it rain, but they sure as hell can help us get ready for the droughts, the floods, and the fires that will come. And that requires organization, planning, and deploying all those tools, but just as critical, the carpenters. Those are the governance bodies, the watershed boards that are going to make those decisions. So Emily, you asked, what are we doing at Polis? That's what we're doing at Polis.
Thank you, Oliver. And I just want to take a second that the reason I've brought these people together in this panel has been to talk about collaboration from multiple different perspectives. So on that note, I'm going to go to Dr. Moen, who is bringing the decision-making data, especially around floods, that's going to help make our action plan. So Dr. Moen.
Thanks, Emily. I got pulled in at the very last minute, so bear with me. My first venture into flood mapping goes back 53, 54 years when I was doing my master's in United States. And the last of my flood mapping was about 2 months ago. And in between, I took the program, flood damage reduction program, which, and I will call that one version 1, when I was with Environment Canada, from cradle to grave. And in about 92, 93, it was basically abandoned very badly. And I used to use the term from Shakespeare's, one of the Shakespeare's drama, most unkindest cut of all. That was the FDR program. And we cannot do flood mapping, flood damage reduction program activities in a piecemeal basis, on a basis that we can do it for 15 years, and then we won't do it for another 20 years, and then we'll pick up, and then we'll continue. It doesn't work that way, because that's what my 50 years in this field has, because I have taught this course for 30 years at McMaster University and TMU, and that's what I have instilled in my students, is that you simply cannot walk away. Once you draw the line, there has to have the government bodies to make sure that those lines stay there, they are honored, and then the programs work around using, it's not cast in stone, the lines, because they do move around with the extremes that are coming in. And I think that it's important from that perspective. And in between those times, I have worked with IJC. Again, there were elements, the last study that we did in Lake Champlain, it was that element had come into play at the flooding, because it was, the study came into being because of flooding in Lake Champlain and all those areas, anyway, on Richelieu River, all the communities along Richelieu River. And then I was able to contribute, actually, the hydrology, hydraulics guidelines that are in use right now in Canada, because this is the second version of FDR program has come into play. And I'll start to talk about where are the strengths and where are the gaps in a minute. So I did write or contributed to it. I won't say write, because I did most of the flowcharts that you see in version 2 of the guidelines. They were basically my contribution. And Ted knows very well that I'm a flowchart guy, so you will see a lot of flowcharts in that one. And the last thing that I did was I have been appointed or I have been recommended as an Apache expert to WMO, so that I can contribute on behalf of Canada elements in hydrology, hydraulics, flood mapping. So again, I had contributed to another document which could be used world over. Basically, that's what the reason for that particular document is. So let's go and in that document, the thing that came into being was the Sendai framework. And Sendai framework is the one that is driving our own program, or basically is contributing the way, and the lead agency in this one is Public Safety Canada. They are the custodians of the framework, and they are working with other agencies. And that's where I find the challenges that they're slowly showing up, at least from my work with them in the last 3-4 years. And that challenge is there are too many agencies doing the same thing. Public safety is developing floodplain maps. Natural Resources Canada, they have the money. All the funding is going through natural resources for floodplain mapping. And then the last part, small money comes to Environment, ECCC, Environment Canada, and Environment and Climate Change Canada. And that is, it's disturbing from someone who had been through this a lot, is that they are duplicating the similar work, and basically they have to hire the same type of people in 3 different agencies rather than a coordinated effort, centralized in any of the agencies. It's not, but it has to be done through one agency, and they will be responsible for, and we are not having that particular aspect. Then we come to all the work that the minister and others, other speaker has spoken about, and that is we need things that should be done in an organized fashion. Right now, we are using the terminology again in use here. The term, I was on a seminar that was hosted by CWRA last week on flood mapping. That was basically by Public Safety Canada, and they said that they have been mapping the entire country for that purpose. And it is at a high scale, but again, they were using the term flood risk maps. And to be honest, they are not flood risk maps. They are flood hazard maps. And there is a big difference between flood hazard maps and flood risk maps. To get to flood risk maps from flood hazard maps, you need a lot of money. And that you don't spell out that it is a flood risk map, and people like me would say, where is the vulnerability, where is the exposure, where are the dollar values, what is the annual damage that you are getting. You cannot determine that just from flood risk maps. And it's about time, and it is in Sendai framework that we should work with flood risk, and we should try to reduce that disaster of flood risk. And that can only happen if we have the full package, full information in front of us. And that includes working for the resilience of how fast we can recover from flood damages, whether we should have flood damages to the extent that we are getting, and that comes to land use. And within land use, we have to worry about urbanization, urban sprawl, land use changes. We are having a lot of wildfires that will have a big impact on hydrology. So all these things have to be taken into account. Climate change, I have not even spoken about that. Right now, as you said, there is about work is including climate change. Climate change is not being included the way it should be included. Climate change doesn't do in piecemeal basis. It has to be done on a regional basis, on a provincial-wide basis, or at least on a regional basis. For example, and the work that Oranas is doing at a global scale, and then a regional scale, and then what I call ultra-regional scale. The Bavarian project that Oranas has taken with German agencies, it's wonderful. They are doing the work that should be done for that. And then you come to the flood risk maps. Flood risk maps, the only place that I can say with surety that good flood risk maps were produced, and that was in Lake Champlain study. Lake Champlain study had, and they spent a lot of money in establishing the floor elevations, the damages that can happen. So you need the stage damage curves. And stage damage curves will not come easy. I remember the money that was spent in Lake Champlain. And if you multiply that one small study across the country, it adds up quite a bit. But there is help on the way. AI is around the corner. There are agencies that are producing very high quality digital maps, and we can make sure you use ChatGPT or whatever we can and let them do. At least we'll get we'll be one step closer to getting flood risk maps without spending too much money. But again, there has to have that vision has to be there. You just simply cannot walk away from our problem by saying that we are producing flood risk map. They are not flood risk map, believe me. I've seen the flood risk maps when they have come out. But they are step in the right direction. I would say that the gaps are there. The gaps need to be closed. And we have to make sure that we don't develop areas that are prone to flooding and then say that we will fix it if the flood comes. We should not do that. And we'll be doing a disservice to our future generations for putting them in harm's way. So I will stop at that, and then we'll pick up questions on those 4 points that Sendai framework has given us.
Thank you. And then to round everything together, I'm really happy to be introducing Charmaline Menes-Millard to talk about community resilience and what that looks like on the ground and bringing an equity perspective. So I'm going to have you talk about that now.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate and I feel so honored to be here. So thank you, Emily, and fellow panelists. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm just so pleased to be here on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Mississaugas of the Credit, and Wendat peoples. So miigwech for the stewardship of these territories over generations. So my name is Charmaline Mendes-Millard. I'm at the University of Waterloo's Faculty of Environment as an adjunct faculty and the Director of Partners for Action, which was formed over 10 years ago to advance flood resiliency in partnership with founding sponsors, cooperators, and farm mutual reinsurance. So what we do is applied community engaged research around 3 strategic priorities: climate action when it comes to preparedness and awareness, adaptation strategies, so advancing those at the local, regional, and national levels, such as nature-based solutions, considering strategic relocation or managed retreat, and climate justice. So flood risk maps, which maybe there aren't flood risk maps, but anyway, we'll see, with an equity lens, basically taking hazard exposure and a social vulnerability index and mapping those together for one version of climate risk assessments to base decision making on. My work has really focused on the equity issues at the community, who's disproportionately impacted by climate change, and then the hazard events, and what can we do about it. The work that we've been doing really is thanks to, I have a fabulous team of faculty, but the students really, as we all know, do much of the work. So I should just really shout out to Felicia Waterroot, Shiree Kotar, Elena Christie, Julie Wright, all these people, Sheridan Hill, Kazra Motlet Zadet, and others who've done a lot of the research that I'll be talking about. So over the past years, we've partnered with Canadian Red Cross on an inclusive resilience project, partnered with Natural Resources Canada on guidelines for engaging communities in floodplain mapping, partnered with National Research Council on, and Halifax Regional Municipality on what climate resilient retrofits are all about. Basically with the idea that we're facing not only flood risk, which of course flooding is our most hazardous, costly hazard in Canada, but multiple hazards all at once because of climate change. So it used to be with the disaster risk reduction cycle, you might have time to prepare, anticipate, then you cope, you respond, then you recover, then you learn from that and you prepare and you mitigate risk, and then you go all over again. But now we are facing cascading hazards, compounding, ones over on top of each other. We're stretching our resources so thin at all levels. And who's impacted? People on the ground. One of the things that has been striking to me is that there are inequities in our society. We all know this. COVID showed us who has a voice, who's prioritized, who gets the resources first around the world and within our communities. The same thing happens when a disaster happens. So we've got this concept of social vulnerability, and you can assess those in different ways. I've learned through this process, I'm a geographer that has done physical geography and human geography, and I deal with both types of methods. But one thing I've realized about flood maps is that there's so many things, so many choices that you make in the modeling, in what's included, the boundaries. And so what are the assumptions that are made when we're saying this region is higher risk than that region, or this has more exposure than that, or these people are more vulnerable than those people? What are the assumptions we're making? And this is the driving force behind the work that my team has done. So we've done a literature review on who's disproportionately impacted by climate change, the conditions that impact people's ability to prepare for, cope with, and recover from disasters, and how you can assess that with a social vulnerability index that you can then layer on with your hazard maps, whether it's flood, wildfire, et.cetera. So some of the factors include things like social networks and connectedness. Who is cared for and thought of? Who knows who to talk to when there's something that they need help with? So many people are isolated. There are people who don't have necessarily established social networks. Those all play into risk at the end of the day and people's impact. We often then think about socioeconomic status, economic insecurity. So you're talking about water security. I think security is a good framing because economic security is more than just income. It is education level that then why do we include education level in that? It's because you assume that then you have more opportunities for better job prospects, things like that. Health disparities. If you have chronic health issues, then you're made more vulnerable to disasters because there are extra things you have to think about, and you might be more impacted because of heat, for example, or wildfire smoke. So those are the types of things that we've been looking into. It can be overwhelming, but the good news is we do know that there are people working within organizations, within communities that we can tap into. I think that we don't have to just focus on the environmental sector or who is dealing with water only. No, let's deal with the people who are actually actively connecting with people on the ground that have different experiences and needs, from immigrant groups to people who are dealing with, I don't even know what, cultural groups. It doesn't even matter. I just think a coordinated approach where we can bring voices and have representation at the table when decisions are made about what are the solutions for the things that we're facing, that's the key. And having rights holders and Indigenous governments lead with, actually adhering to all the calls for action from the TRC, adhering to recommendations that are out there. I think we actually know what to do. There's a gazillion recommendations out there. It's just about acting on it and everyone doing their part for it. So taking a socio-ecological systems approach is what I would be advocating for, because we are interconnected with and part of our environment and interconnected with each other. And so those are the types of things that we've been working on at Partners for Action, and I'm really looking forward to just connecting with you more on all of these things. But my final word on this is really to take an equity approach. It's about thinking about systems of power and privilege, who's advantaged and not, and bringing in people and listening to them in that process. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so how the next few minutes are going to work, I'm going to ask some planned questions for our panelists in the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to go straight to the audience. So I really recommend taking a moment to think of what you want to ask. And one question I want to ask you to consider is, what does water security mean to you? We've heard a lot of different ideas. For some, it's defense. For some, economics. For some people prefer the term natural security. So let's talk about what that actually means. So my first question is for Minister. What I think we should really bring attention to is how differently the territories are having to deal with the climate changes. So what I want to ask you is, can you speak to the Northwest Territories' perspective as a territory working towards climate resilience and the challenges you're facing?
Yes, certainly, and thank you so much for the question. I think the Northwest Territories is a very unique area which has very unique challenges based on our geography. We're a very large area with a very small number of people, and as I spoke earlier, the remoteness and the challenges that are associated with that in normal times are challenging in themselves. But over the last number of years, we've been under a sustained drought for 3 years, which has had a tremendous impact on our infrastructure as well as in our ability to resupply our small communities. We had barge seasons lost on the Mackenzie River, where we were unable to resupply small communities along the river, where we were flying in heating oil into the Sawtoo region, and people were paying over $5 a liter for heating oil to heat their house, as one example. And it certainly has had tremendous impacts on the economy as a whole, and put a lot of pressure on our government to provide the supports and pieces that we need to support our small and remote communities. My background is in fire. Prior to being the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, I worked for the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in the fire program. So, looking at fire and how that has really changed the landscape in the north. In 2023, we burned over 4 million hectares in our worst fire season in history. And that has really changed physically our landscape across the north. I mean, near Fort Smith, we had a pine forest that had 40-foot trees that is now a prairie. It had a previous burn, went through, and so the impacts are something we're living every day. And from a resilience perspective, you know, we're working on our resilience piece, but we're very dependent as a territory on federal support because of our remoteness and our challenges. So we've fortunately had you know, some good federal support over the last number of years, especially when we're talking about you know, wildfire and but you know, looking at our ability to be proactive really talks about how we have to work with our Indigenous communities, our Indigenous governments and organizations, and you know, build that capacity within our small communities so that we're able to have the resources available locally that we can you know, maximize the results and ensure that our communities are able to you know, work toward building capacity, because that certainly has been one of our really big challenges.
Thank you. And moving right on to the professor, we have talked privately. What are the challenges of flood resilience? Like, what are our capacity issues in flood resilience as well, kind of moving from wildfire and drought into the flooding? And I know you say it as it is, so I'm looking forward to what you're going to say.
Actually, that's a big challenge, and the challenge comes from the silo effect that we have in the system. You know, if you look at flood resiliency, you need to have a unified approach, and in that one, we need to have all levels of government involved. And if I'm just looking at Ontario, from an Ontario perspective, we have to have federal government, the provincial government, the conservation authorities in southern Ontario and the regional offices and the municipality. So there are 4 levels of government, and what are the mechanisms that will connect them? At one time, it was the flood damage reduction program that provided that kind of glue that will go through the entire system. So if we have a study to be done and making sure at the end point we are talking about the resiliency, it is the flood risk map is are the first set of products that are required. And to do that one, you need to have the buy-in. The federal government and the provincial government, they normally have agreements, MOUs that will guide them towards their objectives. But to have the flood risk maps, they have to be produced locally at the conservation authority level. So if we ask them to contribute something, there is a buy-in. And if we are talking, when we start to talk about how the resiliency will come into play through flood forecasting, the other elements of that will feed into that one, maps are the first step. Then you have to look at what we call other flood damage reduction measures. And that will include things like flood forecasting. I won't go into flood protection measures because they are another beast in themselves. We simply cannot start on large projects anymore. Even where we talk about, say, dikes to protect, as an engineer, I always say we need to have these dikes to be gold-plated. Gold-plated dikes simply mean not gold-plated in a physical sense, but maintained in a very impeccable manner. I have seen these dikes that were basically opened up by farmers in southwestern Ontario because the land side was they had a lot of water, so they opened up the dike. I'm talking about southwestern Ontario dikes. The water from the farmer's field came into Thames River. 2 weeks later, the flood season had started. The Thames was in flood. What happens? The water from the Thames, it went back into the field, and even in a much worse condition. So these are the elements of resilience that we have to play that connection with the not even with the local government, but with the people on the ground, with the groups that are there. That farmers, you are talking about educators, and I think it becomes obvious. Federal government, they provide the money, they provide the funds for the maps, and then they sit back. I think that should not happen. It should be, they should be there, all partners should be there at each step, so that there is a buy-in from the people on the ground.
Thank you. And that goes right in. So I want to give us a full half hour. So I want to go strongly really quickly, because one thing I didn't hear is the word community. And I want to ask, how can we work with communities to prepare their resilience measures?
That's a big question, but yes, part of it is, like you're saying, involve community members and those that represent them throughout not only flood mapping processes, but programming, and also raising awareness and actually acting across multiple hazards. So it's not enough to just do flood mapping. We need to think about how does that intersect with our wildfire areas, and even knowing for that specific locale, I think the region is a very good scale to work at, because it's big enough that you can see, or the watershed level, big enough that you can see the interconnections and work together, but small enough that you're still connected to the local people. And so empowering people at the regional scale to work locally, but also access federal and provincial levels of support, and working at the nexus of policy, practice, and research. Governance bodies that can actually bring people together. Forums like Understanding Risk BC that I'm a part of, it really is taking a multi-hazard, whole of society approach to bringing people together, and it takes time and coordination and capacity and showing up and building relationships over time. But also with community resiliency, I do think that being able to focus on the people that are made most vulnerable will help us all. Our systems are not designed for everyone, and people are not vulnerable all the time. We often use census data as a proxy for social vulnerability. So for example, we might have women, visible minorities, low-income people, and intersectional identities, low-income elderly people, whatever. All of those census data, we use those as proxies to say who in general do we think is made more vulnerable than others. If you can just start with those types of maps, so you generally know where people are, then you need to ground truth that with community engagement and seeing, okay, these are what our maps say, what do you see on the ground? There's only so much you can do, like you're saying, we only have so many resources, so how do we prioritize where to put those resources? I would say look at where there are already people who are in high hazard zones. So I think there was the task force on, relocation and flood insurance or something like that, maybe by public safety, where I think they found that the top, let me see here, something about how the top 1% of high risk residential homes take up 30% of the damages or the costs. Maybe it's the top 10% take up 30%. Regardless, we know where these areas are. First, it's a no-brainer, floodplains. Secondly, right, we have a lot of hard surfaces in urban areas, and so stormwater management becomes extra key. And then third, we need high-quality data consistent across the years to be able to make assessments to drive decisions, and I'm thinking of quantitative and qualitative data on the ground. So it's just a lot all at once, but I think focusing on the people who are usually excluded from processes, let's just start there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have not forgotten Oliver, and I cannot forget Oliver, but what I want to do is I really want to give time to the audience. So I have one of the junior fellows. If you can come, raise your hand, please tell us who you are and ask a question. I will make one request. No monologues, please. I would love to hear more about you in the coffee, but please ask short questions so we can get to good answers. Thank you.
Oh.
An excuse to stand up, Monty McMurchie.
What I'm hearing from all four of you is that the zeitgeist concerning water is shifting. I am looking to sub-Saharan Africa to see what the challenges or the dangers are. One can live without foodstuffs for several days, if not months. With water, your life expectancy is measured in hours. People will fight and die over water. Right now, our neighbors in the south, thus far our good friends, they are running out of water, particularly in the western part of the United States. We have agreements, but agreements only go so far. What is going to happen when agreements fail and people are thirsting for water? I have seen kinetic warfare, and it disturbs me profoundly. What advice or solutions do you have? And what is the ethic?
How do we prevent water wars, Oliver?
Oh, that's a simple old question. So I think there's a couple things we can debunk. Running out of water, not sure. Unable to live within their ecological reality, perhaps. So there's a shift that has to happen first off. Water, as we all know, is a bit of a unique substance because it's bloody, heavy, and hard to move around. And in most cases, it doesn't make sense for it to ship a long way to grow feedstock hay, for example. And so some of the tension, I think you're right to identify, because I'd say the recent history of, at least North America has been that we'll just engineer our way out of the problem. And I think we have to shift that. So we have to sort of hit the sort of multiple level of saying home waters, our waters matter. So we have to take care of our waters to begin with. And at the same time, reinforce the need. And I'm not going to comment on sort of the politics of the day, but I'm going to recognize that these things tend to go in cycles. And so we do see conflict emerging, but at the same time, we do have some good institutions. An example of the Boundary Waters Treaty, the act that is 100 years old and has weathered some of those storms. Will it weather this one? I anticipate in some sense, yes, and it provides some of those connections. So I'm going to really go back to saying what we need to do is really begin governing, so sort of my opening remarks. How do you avoid the water wars of the future is you don't pit neighbors against neighbors. And in fact, water is one of those rare substances that actually brings us to collaboration. We're more likely to work together to deal with this common problem for all the reasons you said, because the stakes are high, than we are to fight about it. So yes, there's lots of little examples of conflict around water. Mostly we find ways to work together. So, in a 3-minute blurb at a panel, I can't answer it perfectly, but what we can begin to say is we know where to start. You have to take care of the watershed. You have to live in ecological realities. You have to have relations with your neighbors. You have to work together. We have to start with things like recognizing Indigenous authority as part of the solution. We have to build modern public institutions that can begin to tackle some of these problems and bring sort of the hub of knowledge and expertise. We know we have all the technical solutions we need. What we don't do is deploy them very well. So there's work to be done, but it is not hopeless on any level because we have so many dozens of examples where there is success. And I'll leave it at that, and we can use the coffee break maybe to dig into some of those examples.
So you all think of water security a bit differently, and I think generally the Canadian public thinks of ourselves as a water-rich resource. But extremes are sort of shifting this idea a little bit. How do you all consolidate this idea of being water-rich but still changing a narrative in a way that's a bit more practical, a little bit maybe more urgent to think about and resonate with this idea that water is a commodity that we have to invest in as the public, really, in your different fields of work?
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that the one thing that we really need to consider here is, and I'll speak first to the urgency piece, is I think as political leaders we look at you know, we're all on a limited timeline, if you will, you know, in our time in office, and, you know, time is always of the essence. And so I think, you know, having political leaders that are willing to step outside the traditional box, you know, to take some risk and look at issues like this that are urgent and really need to have creative solutions that you know, move it along is certainly one step. And I'm sorry, I forgot the last part of your question. Well, yeah, and I mean, I think, you know, the engagement piece, and certainly I'll give you a Northwest Territories perspective. So, I mean, water is critical, and I think our, you know, our work together with the Indigenous governments and our collaborative approach to not having a territorial government kind of top-down approach, but a government-to-government relationship, whether it's a established Indigenous government or an Indigenous organization, and that collaborative piece that also brings in the municipalities, you know, and have a real territorial approach to how we have to work together. None of us can go it alone, and I think that that's becoming more of a reality across the country. And certainly I think also us being a downstream jurisdiction from a lot of industrial activity that's happening upstream of us really lends to that pan-Canadian discussion that we have to have with our neighbors and how we have to work together. We have a great relationship working with our neighbors, even though we do not necessarily agree on many issues. We still have to create those relationships and ensure that we're able to come to the table, partisan politics aside, and have those real conversations that allow us to find solutions that we can all live with. Thank you.
Hi there, thanks very much. Good morning. My name is Glenn Benoit. I'm with the International Joint Commission. Thank you very much for your remarks. The concept of water security, of course, was touched on by all of you. I was intrigued at how it's morphing, expanding more broadly into watershed, natural security. Security is an objective. It's a goal. We want to achieve security, and we can talk about what that looks like and what that means, but it's the how that I'm a bit curious about. Governance is an essential part of the process towards that, but for many practitioners, we turn to things like adaptive management as a way to get there and tracking progress or hopeful progress. So I'm curious to know whether you think adaptive management still holds that promise in this big, ambitious adventure project that we're on, or if there's another way. I'm just curious about the how side of it, and as myself as a practitioner, I think about adaptive management by default. Is it the best way? Are there other ways? I'd like to think and talk about the means towards achieving security. Thank you.
I'll just start really quickly with, I think adaptive management or any process that allows you to have that it's okay to have an iterative process, that you're constantly learning, you're evaluating, you're monitoring, and then you're changing, and that it's okay to keep changing and trying things, and it's okay to fail at something and try something else. That culture of continuous improvement that is a promise of adaptive management, I think is helpful, because really with climate change, what's striking to me is that it's just caused this unpredictable reality. We found it hard enough before to manage our resources and ourselves. Now it's unpredictable. We can't even figure out, municipalities can't book snow blowers or snow plows necessarily consistently anymore, right? It's that kind of thing. Every part of our lives are now unpredictable. So what can we do to build our capacity to be adaptive, to be flexible, to be just malleable? I think that might be the key going forward with climate change.
I will add to what Sharmeen was speaking. I know Glenn from long time, so I can I can tease him out on that. What we need for adaptive management to be properly instituted for water security, we need buy-in at different levels of government. I think that's a big, again, the silos that we have in our system. We need horizontal connections in the silos. And one approach that we have we adopted in several of IJC studies was shared vision approach, whether it is shared vision planning, shared vision modeling, we name it. But shared vision planning is, and that can lead, because the shared vision, the actors sitting across around the table would have all jurisdictions that will be there with the same objective of how to get to the security. Because security for the province may be slightly different than the security from a federal perspective or from a municipal perspective, where they may be dependent on groundwater for their water supply, the security of that water supply. And as I learned today, there could be challenges down the road if people buy those rights of groundwater. Just this morning, people were talking about people buying those rights for groundwater. It's a complete cycle. You simply cannot buy part of that cycle and assume that it is there. So shared vision planning as a means for the adaptive management, because those are all connected in a way. And if we put security, we have to draw that line that who all are interested in that security, from federal government right down to the common farmer, for that matter.
And maybe a developmental evaluation approach could help in this case, because you're thinking about what are you trying to achieve, and take an equitable approach to that evaluation, where you engage stakeholders and go through that process together and constantly iterate. That could help.
Thank you so much for assembling this panel. And speaking to collaboration, appreciate that watershed security framing, because watersheds are living and they guarantee the life for all of us. And it takes the collaboration in institutions, whether that be with our neighboring countries or our neighbors down the street. And so I'm curious, how do we shift some of the language around risk to responsibility when it comes to engaging in those vulnerable areas? Perhaps looking at things like what the Red Cross does in terms of mobilizing communities. What are some of the barriers to doing that, and how can you do that within our institutions, actually working with civil society also?
I'm going to do a 2-for-1 because I didn't get in on Glenn's. Don't worry, I'll find him at the break. But I think both questions relate to the same problem. And the fundamental problem that I think we're facing, and we can look, there's two things happening here simultaneously. Look outside. It's the universal rule. You have a water conference, it rains. When it rains, we forget the water matters, right? And so we have a priority problem. And so I think many of these little bits and pieces we're talking about, which are really critical, this idea of we're going to shift from roles to responsibilities, I think is a really critical one. But it only happens when something is a priority and it matters. And so we're struggling, I'm going to say as a society, it relates to the first question, because our leaders and our institutions are structured around a different set of priorities. So we have to shift the priority, and we know that some of the more thoughtful leaders, will point to one right here who's come all the way from the north to come and talk about water. Unfortunately, that's a rarity, and so we need to shift that. And that, that happens sort of top down and bottom up at the same time. We have dozens of solutions, we have dozens of people mobilized, but we haven't yet hit the priority piece where we can begin that shift from roles or rules to responsibilities. That's how you begin to unlock it. I don't think it's easy. It's systems change at a wholesale scale. And of course, we're going to have to adapt. We're going to take 2 steps down the path and realize we're on the wrong path maybe, and we have to take a step over. It's going to be all kinds of different. We're going to need the latest science. We're going to need imaging. We're going to need to understand better what the flow. We're going to have to understand cultural values as well as just biophysical, right? So you have this sort of constant interplay. Security, we'll never get there, but we have to constantly work there towards it. And I'm just going to say, we aren't working hard enough at collaboration. We talk about it, this group would do it, but our institutions don't work hard enough. There's not enough resources, there's not enough priority to actually collaborate, build relationships, put in rules. I'm a sucker because I went to law school and I'm legally trained. That means I think rules matter. It's not just promises, we need to have backstops, consequences. All that works together to begin that shift that you're asking about, in my view.
Just add quickly, collaboration I think just doesn't happen. You need a backbone, you need backbone administrative coordination support. I think that's part of what we're missing here is we undervalue that kind of, just the people who keep track of people, bring them together, convene them. Thank you.
So I'd like to say we are living in interesting times, but one of the things that I've seen in the last while that I thought could help kind of galvanize this discussion is the trade barriers in Canada. We've heard about that for 50 years. Well, you can't change those trade barriers and blah, 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 and each province has their own. And 50 years of government went through not changing any of that. Then overnight, our economic security has changed, and all of a sudden they're looking at how can we take down all these barriers. So we've got a model that we can look at in that same perspective and say, for water security, because each of the provinces have done all their own things, but there's nothing to galvanize it. If we have a vision of what is important for water security, following the same mechanism that they're doing for the trade barriers, I think we might be able to kind of remove a lot of this and ensure collaboration and towards a common objective. So is that a possible in our dream here? Well, securities, all the provinces have to buy into this vision, just like economic security was important. It's always been important. It's just, it changed now. It was galvanized because of what's happened. And all of a sudden, everybody was prepared to change. We have to have that same kind of titration point for water, where all of a sudden they realize we have to do this. And like I said, we have a model that, so we don't have to build something else. We can see how this one's working.
What I might tie that into, I'm sorry I have a microphone, but Minister, what I might tie that into is you recently chaired the CCME, so you were front hand seeing how provinces and territories are working together. And is there the will for a collective water strategy or water security strategy? Is there will for that right now?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think, you know, the one takeaway from our CCME event was that we brought our council leaders from the Northwest Territories to the table to participate with the ministers from across the country for a day to give a perspective of how we work collaboratively within the NWT. And I think it provided a eye-opener to a lot of the provincial ministers that really I don't think quite got the context or sort of the big picture of what needs to happen in order to get there. I mean, I'm an optimist at heart, so I mean, I like to think that there is opportunity across the country to have those conversations, and certainly reaching out to my colleagues across the country, you know, talking about water. And you know, I brought up the Canada Water Agency with a number of my colleagues at that event and at other federal, provincial, territorial meetings that I've been at, and you know, spoke. I won't say I spoke negatively of it, but I suggested that, you know, it's important that the Canada Water Agency's participation be pan-Canadian and not Ottawa down. It may have been perceived as Ottawa down approach, but certainly from talking with Mark Fisher, he is certainly not looking for that. That's the last thing that they want it to be. And I think that perspective of, you know, ensuring that all of our jurisdictions are aware, engaged, and that we're able to engage at the political level to get the train moving, if you will, because I think if we try and do it like down at the senior official level, it gets caught up in the bureaucracy, and we'll be sitting here having this conversation a decade from now. I think it needs to come up to that political level, engage all of our political, provincial and territorial leadership, as well as our Indigenous leaders from across the country in that conversation, to ensure that we're looking at it from the 10,000-foot level first at a political way. And the last comment I'll make is, I don't think we need to completely cook the cake before we take it out of the oven, if you will. We have to be willing to take that risk and start moving forward and learn as we go, which I think is, critical. I know the bureaucracy likes to have the final product up front, and I don't think that we'll ever get there and deal with this in a timely manner if that's our approach.
Maybe I'm going to pepper in just two. You can go and get ready. There's two really key ideas there. There is a need for a common vision, but we need to be able to walk and chew gum. So that means we can draft all the policies and strategies and plans we wish, but there's action that can happen in conjunction. And I think the fundamental sort of philosophical shift is senior government has to shift from top-down manager to enabler of local action. And that means shifting their roles to be an enabler, to provide supports, capacity, to lean in where there are good things happening already. And we can use examples, the Mackenzie Basin approach. You can think of examples in BC. There's no end of examples that can be leaned into to show that sort of bottom-up success while we set the conditions for success that includes a shared vision at least, because we know enough about the ecology and the social network to understand what a healthy watershed looks like, what a healthy community looks like. That has to be shared and has to be a priority. So enabler of local action would be the first place I would start if I were in senior government.
My name is Erica Bruce. I'm a bit of an outsider here, and here at the invitation of Dr. Carolyn Jones of TMU. However, I did establish 8 years ago the Jeffrey F. Bruce Fellowship in Canadian Public Water Policy, and it has had tremendous ripple effects. I very much appreciated your valuable comments, all very pertinent. But what I didn't hear was a call to media, because the role of the media is extraordinarily important in creating a groundswell of awareness, and not only attracting the attention of politicians at all levels, but also among the public. And until we have that, I think efforts will not really reach and attain the effect for which you're all working. So I would very much appreciate some comments how to attract the public as well as the social media these days, because this is where people go to for information and comment. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and it speaks to this lady's comment before about, we take water for granted and how to change public perception. So we partnered with the Red Cross on an inclusive resilience project, and part of that was to research different ways of communicating risk and preparedness and awareness to newcomers, women, older adults. People receive information in different ways. We all have different learning styles as an individual, but then communities generally receive information through multiple media, through visuals, social media, as you said. So it's about figuring out where people are already at, and then working with communications professionals or people to get the messages out and what people can do about it. That's what they want to know. What is it that I need to know in a couple of seconds? And hopefully governments and other people have made it easy, laid the path out for them so that they can just walk it.
Our coffee break is thankfully sponsored by Toronto Metropolitan University, and to introduce the Bruce Fellowship, who we are lucky enough to have, I believe, 4 fellows here today. So I really urge you to talk to your neighbors, make new friends, ask what they're doing. And Erica, I have a few ideas on communications I'll get with you very shortly. So thank you all.
Any words about the fellowship? Since the coffee is being sponsored by them, let's give them a word.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks, Emily and Tom, first of all, for hosting this great event, and an excellent first panel on what does water security mean. Clearly, there's dimensions of water citizenship, but I want to talk a little bit about the fellowship before you all go out and have your coffee chat. So almost every panelist up here mentioned the importance of their education and the next generation of leaders on water policy in Canada. And so Erica popped up and asked a question and told you a little bit about the fellowship before I had the opportunity to get up here. But 8 years ago, Erica Bruce, in the memory of her husband, Jeffrey Bruce, who was a career public servant and diplomat who worked on some of Canada's top environmental files in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he was very concerned that Canada had lost its focus on water at the end of his life, and Erica set up the fellowship in his legacy. To date, she has funded 16 graduate students over the last 8 years. Each year, she funds 2 graduate students and attracts them to focus on water issues and build the kinds of capacity, leadership, communications that you have all talked about today. She's also funded a postdoctoral fellow who spent 2 years focusing on the transformative and critical role of water data and technology in the future of water politics and policy in Canada. And most recently, along with TMU, she has funded a new water policy fellow and executive in residence who we're very fortunate to have Mike Goffin in that role currently. So I just wanted to say a few words about the importance of the next generation. As I look around the room, I see a lot of young people in the room, but I think we all have a responsibility to think about the future of generation and how we can play a role. So we've partnered with many of you already over the last few years, but if you're interested in learning more about the Bruce Fellowships, you can visit our website, and we also have a LinkedIn, so if you could get connected to the Bruce Fellowships that way, we'd really appreciate it. And with that, there are a few fellows in the room. I'm just going to maybe have you stand, and people can chat with you. Yenna, Wyatt, and Tanjot, they're happy to chat with you over coffee, and Erica and I are here as well. And we're always looking for partners. So if you're interested in doing really innovative projects with university students, come talk to us during the break, and happy to sponsor the coffee. Thanks so much, Emily and Tom.
Coffee next door, back in 15 minutes.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much.